Modern technology. Pretty exciting.
Aren't we like on?
Yeah, but we're waiting for them to tell us when we can. Don't tell us.
What are like a zillion credits rolling or
Oh,
something?
well, no,
We're ready now.
told.
He says, tell Temi we're ready.
We're ready! All right. Well, welcome, whoever, to Readings and Songs Against the End of the World. First off, we are going to present Fallacy by Craig Monteer. Just a second, let me shut this door.
Son of a bitch. Motherfucker. Cunt. I had a hammer. I'd hammer in the morning. My baby, she's so mean. She belongs in Playboy magazine. Pow! Hey! Boom! Hey! 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 Die! Oh! 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 Yeah, yeah, yeah. Another day, another dollar. If I had a girlfriend, pow, 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 die, commie, nigger, pig-o, rat, Indian, what else, what else, what else, slow-pad, gook, Greek, other, ding, whoa, oh. Hey, hey, hey.
Greg!
What?
Watch out!
Huh? Oh. Thank you.
Oh, oh, God. That's my room. Oh. I have to find a page for this one. Hang on a second. Oh, here we go. All right. Whoa. Wow. All right. This is a chapter, well, a section of a chapter from a book that I wrote called The Curse. I think I want a chair. I think I want a chair. A chair. Oh, can I have that chair?
Okay.
Great, that was great. Okay. All right. Abraham sat, his arm around his only daughter's shoulder, her exhausted, curious head resting on his arm. A darkened world made a surrealist background for the pointillist pastiche of lights in a modular component skyline. Sarah kicked off her shoes, put her feet on the coffee table, let herself be taken by the story. This, he said, is about my mother. Where is the sun? There is never any sun anymore. Only awful wet air and gray, gray sky. Don't cry. Mama will hold you. Rachel! What? Rachel! Do not speak to me. You are not real. You are a voice. The voice of a dead man. Leave me alone. You have no power here. This is America. I do not hear you. Your curses mean nothing here. Rachel! Shh! It's only a voice. The voice of a dead man. I cursed you then, Rachel. Your children. I cursed them all. You disobedient girl. You won't hide from me. Please be quiet. Shh, please. Shh. I will shut the windows and the door. The voice comes in through the door. Oh, here's the woman from the blue house. She wants to borrow something. Yes, there is an empty cup in her hand. We all bear our empty cups. The children are quiet now. Abraham is asleep. Grace is outside. She has found someone to play with. She wants to stay. The oil is her excuse. Oil for a cake for Sabbath. She wants to talk. Good. We will speak about the laundry and the neighbors. This will keep the voice away. The gray sky is onerous. He says he will not touch me. He promises me. He says he understands. No more children. This is good. Children eat his money, he says. He has his son. Before his liquor hands touching me, wanting me to do disgusting things. Where did he learn those things? Oh, no more. No more hands. This is good. Only the voice now. She wants to know about Poland, about my life. Did I meet my husband there? No, I met him on the boat. We speak the same, and he is strong, and I thought I must be married here to survive. But what is marriage here in America? We never see our husbands. We don't know them. We live in wartime without a war. The men are gone all day to fight each other for their money. The women stay at home with the children and wait. What do we wait for? For strangers to return. I can read Hebrew and American. My husband cannot read, but he can fight. Poland, my God. She comes here from Germany. There's nothing there like Poland. Chickens running wild, my brothers and my sisters, the hate for Jews. Nowhere is it like Poland. She came here with the blessings of her father, with a quilt that her mother had made for her dowry. And me, Rachel. I came with curses raining on my head. Forever, he said, there will be no escaping me. And my mother and my sisters crying, begging me, do not go. He will punish them if I go. Ephraim told me about America. He had been and come back. He wanted all of us to come here. He said Poland will be bad for Jews. Money, he said, lots of money and clean new houses and no beatings in the night. The Jews are safe here. They don't rape our sisters, he said. Do not use that word, my father said. It is an unclean word. In America, they will not burn your barn, Uncle, Ephraim said to my father. But here we understand God, Ephraim, my father said. There we are strangers. It is always bad for strangers. Your family is here. You shall be buried here also. We saw it. My sister and myself, we saw my father give him the evil eye. There was silence then until Ephraim said softly, with respect but strong, brave, like a boy who had been to America. Our God is everywhere, Uncle, and we are strangers everywhere, Uncle. I wish it was Ephraim's voice I hear all day, all night in the gray. I wish my husband was like you, cousin, eyes full of hope, our children born with their eyes shining alive. But my father's curse was on him. Everyone there knew that the Rebbe, our father, spoke with fire. You need a deed done, they said. Go to Ezekiel. He leaves no thing unfinished. He had the ear of God. And Ephraim took ill. No cause. No one knew why. Was it the food, the water, something he brought back from America? We knew why. Our father had decided that Ephraim was dangerous. The devil had gotten inside him and made him tempt us away from tradition to the wickedness of America. Ephraim died. We buried him. But before he died, he told me about the boat, where it is and how to find it, what to say to the people there. He made me practice for him. Ephraim sent me. He told me to pray for courage. If I find my courage, he said, I will find my truth. And if I find my truth, I can find freedom. Go, he said, it is our only hope. I did not understand everything, but you have a good heart, he said. And what the mind cannot find, the heart can hold. I never saw a boat before. I kept thinking, a boat. I told my sister, maybe she would come with me. I am going, come. But in the dark, the fear took her and she lost her silence. She ran to my father. My father came with a stick. Then I knew I would die. beaten into the dust. Then from nothing, from nowhere, the chickens ran screaming. They ran screaming in circles as if they knew. How did they know? My mothers and my sisters heard the chickens, and they came, and they scream, and the whole of Poland is screaming, "Do not go! Do not do this awful thing!" Then he spoke, my father. His voice was louder than all the screaming. He said, "I curse you. I curse you for all time, forever. You are not mine. You are not of me. You are not of God." He said his tears will seal the curse. God respects a good man's tears. He did not hit me. He dropped the stick. Then he took his evil look away, turned his back, and the screaming started again, the wailing for the dead. And my sister crying the most. "I love you," she says. It is true. The one who betrayed me loved me the most. Now I must go. I am no one then. To my family I am nothing. If I stay, they will not feed me. I will die. I walk. I see Ephraim's eyes in the boat. The light is enough to show the shapes of the trees, but not their colors. Every step the fear walked beside me. I thought my father would find me, kill me on the road. But no, he did not. He knew his curse is enough. She wants to leave now. She must go back to her blue house. Her daughter is only old enough to watch the others for a short time. She should come play with my Grace. Yes, goodbye. I do not know what we said, but it was good to sit with you. No, do not touch me. You promised. You do not want children. If you touch me, we will make a child. I know. Do not do this. Honor me. Leave me my clothes. I am ashamed. My tears are the hands of angels touching my face with their pity. I am fire of shame. He does not see the angels. They rock me in their arms and whisper, but I cannot hear them. He forces my legs open and the fire takes my life. Aaron is crying. Grace is screaming. He hits me, my face. My cries wake the children, he says. Horror, he says. I want to go to them. He says it is a trick. My body is his body. He pays for it every day. If I am his, I am nothing, because he is nothing. I should not speak. The angels cry, but their tears cannot reach me. My eyes are dry with hate. I hate my husband. I hate his smell, his breath. His hands tear the flesh off my bones. Own me, destroy me. You are still nothing. Scream for me, Abraham. Cry for me, Grace. I am dying into hate. This husband, who is a stranger, beats himself into me until the flow of his being pours into mine. Now, I am nothing. I will never forgive. I replace my torn dress on my torn body, and I go to comfort the children, rock them to sleep in my grieving arms. Who is she? She says she's a doctor. She looks like she tends pigs. She looks like a pig. This makes me laugh. What am I laughing at, she wants to know. I am doing evil. I should not laugh. But you are big and fat, swollen with little hairs that stick up all over your body, like a pig. She has the biggest hands I've ever seen. Her teeth are pointed. She tries to hide them, but I can see. It smells like a butcher shop. There's a table full of knives, long knives. I feel like sitting. There's nowhere to sit. Will it hurt? Oh, yes, it will hurt. God will punish you for your sin. What sin? He does not punish my husband. Where is the money? Here is the money. I count it out, and I count out my life. She looks calm now. She feels better with money in her pocket. My food money, the children's clothes money. I even stole my husband's liquor money. Lie down on the table. Lift up your skirt. Good. A big, wide girl. Her hands are cold. Very cold. Don't move, she says. I have a knife. I know this. Be still! If I don't stop moving, she will tie me for my own good. Tie me then! Now she's angry. There are women waiting outside. She must be done with all of us before dark. She has no light. A scream of horror tears my flesh, up through my body, up the top of my head, which opens like a scissors. The world swims in a red sea. I will die like the Egyptians. now black, and I fall. The chickens are screaming. My mother is crying. My mother has wings. The chickens have my children's faces. Don't cry, Rachel. Don't cry. The night is full of fear. It is not your fault. Falling, I lose my legs. I have no legs. I fall faster. I will die with my baby, go with my child into the Red Sea. Ephraim. She slaps me hard. Not today, sister. Nobody dies here. I can't afford it. Wake up! She slaps me again. Can't any of you speak English? You are done. Finished. It's over. It was a girl. You want to see her? A mangled ball of red flesh. My daughter. Rachel, no! You cannot escape me now. You are mine. See what you have done. See what you have become. Murderess. The pain never stops. It eats my belly. I cannot see to find Abraham when he cries. Grace calls me. I cannot hear. I bleed. This is my life, this blood. Cleaning my clothes from it, weak from losing it. He does not touch me now. No, he cannot stand the smell, he says. He drinks, but does not touch me. The woman neighbor tells me I must go to the hospital so I do not die. For the children, she says, the ones who are alive. I let them take me. The children cry. We will take care of them, she says. Guard them from the voice. I say, what voice? She cannot understand. There are no curses in Germany? I am lying in a bed, all white. All white the room, like heaven. The people here wear white, and their faces are white. So white that the light shines through them. I can see their veins more clearly than their eyes. No one speaks to me. This is how I know I will die. And the pain. There is no pain like this for the living. It is your blood, she says. Your blood is bad. Your blood is killing you. Yes, I say, it's the curse. And this time when I tell her, I know she understands. He never comes to see me. She brings the children. The children cry. They want to leave. They hate the bad smell. I cannot tell them that this smell is their mother. I am their mother. I am weak. I can tell them nothing. They can only stare. I can only cry. My blood poison. The pain is unbearable, I say to the doctor. When the pain is unbearable, the doctor says, I will die. The doctor knows nothing. The pain is my life. It is unbearable, endless, and unforgiving. He thinks I deserve to die because he knows I killed my daughter. A life for a life. The voice is laughing. I am floating inside a sea red with vengeful Egyptians. One day, my neighbor comes. She says there will be a home for my children. A rich Jew, a lawyer, can have no sons, and he will pay money for the children. My husband takes the money. Later he will need children. Now he needs money. What can he do with children without a wife? The lawyer, the rich man, comes to see me. I can see nothing now. I feel him. He is cold, like my father. I think you have come back. You have come, stolen them from me. But then I think, no, this one is strong, big, a man to balance evil. He has heard about the curse. Where does it come from, he asks. Poland, I say. Why does it come? I am no scholar, I say. Do you believe this, Rachel? He asks. I do not need to believe it. My blood believes it. I say. Tell them. I will tell them. Dying is a swift, brutal explosion of pain and heat, then silence. The voice does not follow my soul. Ephraim is with me. I am embraced in light. Standing at the foot of the Wailing Wall of Dreams, angels joined hands to mourn for those who prolonged the suffering, for the victims and the perpetrators. Tears tumbled into time, crystallized as magic snowflakes fell onto two little girls, dancing hands raised in wonder, wishing to catch each startling beauty. One small creature, tilting back her head, opened her mouth, stuck her tongue gloriously into the tumult. Capturing 3 ice flowers, she froze as if caught in some dreadful spell. What are you doing? I'm tasting angel tears. Why would angels cry? I'm not sure, but I think the grown-ups know. Oh, thank you. All right. Now, Mr. Montier, do you want this chair? Or do you want a different chair?
Yeah.
You're in, no.
Which
Mr. Montier is going to read from a book which he will tell you about. Does anybody want a glass of water or anything?
Yeah.
I'll go get you water if you want. We can. I'll get it because I know where it is.
Actually, I put that.
Oh, well, then, you want to get this cup spot
We're
out?
still live, right? Okay, I'm gonna read from a book by Susan Griffin. It's called A Chorus of Stones, The Private Life of War. A little cutting. And they're going to be bringing me some water shortly, hopefully.
We can just talk if you want to wait.
Well, if I had something to talk about.
I know. Okay, camera guys, talk to us. How's it going so far?
Yeah.
So, we have to talk louder?
We have to talk louder?
I thought we were talking really loud.
Okay. Well, I can fix that.
Okay.
Now let's
Here's
move
your
over
water.
here.
The water has arrived.
Is that better? Is that a louder? Is that
Well, she has
louder?
to go check. There you go. There's a
Thanks
free
for tuning in,
advertising.
those of you who have tuned in
It is better.
to Missoula Community Access Television. Songs Against the End of the World is this program.
And readings, which we're doing.
Songs, readings, performances against the end of the world.
I'll take it.
Okay, I'm going to be reading from A Chorus of Stones by Susan Griffin. Subtitle is The Private Life of War. For those who have never seen it, the sight is spectacular. A white chimney of fire, a light with an intensity many times brighter than the midday sun, golden, purple, violet, gray, and blue, lighting every peak and crevasse of the mountain. The beauty great poets dream about, followed by an awesome roar which warns of doomsday. Tourists, busloads of schoolchildren, whole families travel to Mount Charleston in the hours before dawn to watch the explosions. The travel section of the New York Times promises the likelihood of an attenuated cloud passing right over the observer's head. It is still 1951. Moved from the Marshall Islands because of the proximity of the Korean War, the test site has been a feature of the Nevada landscape since the beginning of the year. Now, late in the same year, the Army constructs a bivouac, temporary buildings, tents, offices, canteen. Thousands of troops are arriving to witness the explosion and to conduct field exercises under the extending clouds. Pigs and rabbits dressed in military uniform will be placed closer to the blast. This is how it is explained to the Atomic Energy Commission. The soldiers will be taught protective measures, and the Army will study the effects of the explosion on their emotions. Of course, the military study of emotions does not go beyond what is necessary to an army. So much in the range of human emotions is forbidden to the well-trained soldier.
Even if stoicism fails him momentarily, he is quick to regain his composure. Does the blast reverberate into heretofore unknown territories in his mind? Might it unlock secret traumas, a child's terrified weeping, a small and delicate body prey to the overwhelming force of others more powerful than he is? The military mind shies clear of a certain kind of knowledge. Just as in our imagination of public events, we banish what we call private life to the background of our telling. The soldier excludes particular feelings and memories from his idea of who he is. I am thinking now of my father. How well he learned neither to speak of nor to think about his mother. Yet the thought must have been perpetually at the back of his mind, in that place that escapes apprehension. He had a sorrow that he himself could not explain. There are events in our lives that we cannot understand because we keep a part of what we know away from understanding. War is one of those events. And there are other private events which mystify us, as if there were no explanation for them except nature itself. That we are mystified becomes a habit passed from one generation to the next. My father suffered from the silence of his father, and I suffer from his. In the steady continuum of history, we meet a divide between public and private events. Shifting from one to another, the discourse changes. Even the tone of voice, when entering the world we call private, slows down, drops a scale, and perhaps softens. This is partly why we seldom associate military repression with the unnatural silences of childhood. The troubling nature of censorship is clearer when it falls on the very young.
Sorry, I was trying to get the buttons.
If you didn't get that, the troubling nature of censorship, this is not censorship, right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't know if they could hear the light thing buzzing, and I was trying to not have it be distracting, and then I was worse. I'm sorry.
The troubling nature of censorship is clearer when it falls on the very young. A certain kind of silence, that which comes from holding back the truth, is abusive in itself to a child. The soul has a natural movement towards knowledge, so that not to know can be to despair. In the paucity of explanation for a mood, a look, a gesture, the child takes on the blame and carries thus a guilt for circumstances beyond childish influence. I was told a story by a woman whose name I cannot tell, for she must protect her family and her livelihood. It is a story filled with silences. She grew up in a poor family in Appalachia, and what happened to her both at work and in her home is not uncommon in that region, or across America for that matter. So emblematic is her story of the lives of men and women in that part of the country, and I suppose of any poor part of this country, that where I have changed details of her life to conceal her identity, I have simply substituted details true in another life from that place. She did not tell her mother, this woman, but her mother knew. And she was certain of this because after that day she was never again allowed to be in the house alone with her father. From these few details I began to have a sense of her mother. The sociologists give us a picture of the mother of the girl who was sexually abused by her father. This woman was perhaps abused herself, and in a way becomes complicit in the rape of her daughter. If the girl tells her, the mother chastises the girl and may even testify against the child in court. She is a passive, frightened woman who will not believe the truth. But the mother of the woman who told me this story was not like this. She was not passive. She had the characteristic strength of the people of this geography, who year after year survive against great odds. They are courageous and they adapt, and this is due not to any exotic mixture of genes, but to the lessons of poverty taught to generation after generation. To this day, no one in the family has ever spoken a word of it, but all the female children were abused by their father. And yet, with each, this happened only once. And that one time was like a signal to the children's mother, who thereafter kept them separate from the father. She did not leave her husband. She no doubt could not conceive of this as an alternative. The first time that it happened, she already had 4 children. With both parents working, the family was still in serious debt, barely eating, barely keeping one car running. I can see her coming into the house, recognizing a look on her child's face, setting her jaw one more time. "From now on," she says, "from now on, you go over to Grace's house and don't come home before I do, you hear?" And the child hears, and does as she is told because she knows why she must. No doubt Grace knew too, why this child would wait at her house before she could return to her home after school. And she lent her support willingly, without mentioning the reason, or even saying the reason to herself. The child's father was often home, and thus she was often at Grace's house. Her father was not a well man. She was 6 years old and her father 47 when one of his lungs collapsed. It was the coal dust. The particles enter and settle, and over the years do a damage that turns into emphysema or pneumonia or tuberculosis. It is called black lung disease. And it goes with the work. The men in the mines expect this illness, just as they expect the explosions that occasionally occur or the poison gases that can kill a laborer more quickly than a fire. Like the other men of the area, her father would often work without his mask. To do so was a sign of manhood, whereas to be concerned with safety meant being called a sissy, too much like a woman. It was because his lungs were damaged that he was not accepted for the army and had to keep working in the mines when America entered the Second World War. He knew little of the meaning of the conflicts of Europe, but he was a patriotic man and wanted to prove his worth in the battlefield. And so in the midst of the war, when he and the other miners went on strike, and Roosevelt sent down the National Guard to break up the strike, something in him was proud. The president had declared that the Guard was sent in because the work in those coal mines was essential to the national war effort. I can sense the posture of his pride. Though I have never met the man, in my mind's eye it makes him dogged. I wonder if he gave up everything for this pride, or if at an early age it seemed that everything was taken from him so that pride was his only recourse. Men, the way they have been shaped from childhood, and because of this pride, do not suffer well the loss of livelihood. They will risk a great deal to keep it. They will risk a great deal to keep it. In 1957, before a unit of Marines was ordered into the trenches 3 miles away from the experimental explosion of a nuclear weapon, they were told, "What you are about to do is very special and for the benefit of all mankind. Your country will be proud of you." Afterwards, these men crouched down in trenches. They were told to cover their faces with their hands and wait. There was a long, slow countdown. And when it stopped, a very bright light, brighter than the sun. Though their eyelids were shut, they could see the bones in their hands. It was as if the world had turned inside out and nothing would be relied upon to be as it had been before. The sound of the explosion was shattering, and then the ground began to shake violently. Several more miles away, a woman thought she felt an earthquake. Some men were quickly buried in earth. And all of this instilled a particular terror, so that even men who had been close to death in combat were frightened and lost control. Some were weeping. The light was still blinding when a powerful wind, a wind which threw even men half buried in the earth on their backs, began to blow. A mushroom cloud formed over the sky, and a thick dust began to fill the air, so that no one could ever see more than a few feet in any direction. Moments before this bomb went off, one man who had gone through another explosion wanted to stand up and shout, "Stop! Stop! We don't deserve to die this way." This explosion was to be more powerful than the first he had experienced, but he did not know the danger he was in. He was told his body was in no danger from the radiation, and he could not see it or taste it himself. Yet, I believe there was something he felt, not palpable, excuse me.
Well, that's good. It gives us a break from the tension. Jeez.
Not palpable. Not palpable to the senses as we know them, but there, all the same. He had been through 4 years of a military academy in the South. He had had the ambition of becoming a Marine Corps officer, and now he was one. One of his teachers in the basic officers training had told him that the greatest honor he could achieve would be to die on the battlefield. His body shook uncontrollably, but still he did not speak, and only feared, along with his body's terror, that his shaking might be seen by the men he was commanding. Shall I call her Nell, the woman whose name I cannot tell you? I name her after my great aunt who was born in southern Illinois, which is almost like the South. When I imagine her father forcing himself up a hill and into the mines, I imagine his hands trembling as my own hands often tremble when I am overtired. And I can imagine Nell trembling too, after her father had forced himself upon her, trembling and not knowing where to take this trembling. The men who emerged from the trenches were deeply impressed by the devastation they saw. Tanks were melted. Heavy equipment had become cinders. There was a kind of confusion. No one seemed to know quite what to do. Men appeared in clothing designed to protect them from radiation, clothing the Marines did not wear. Some men were directed away from areas which had been called contaminated. On a mountain range several miles north, yucca trees were burning. The men could not find equipment they had been ordered to operate, but still they formed columns of twos and marched in time over this landscape. I can imagine these men standing at attention the morning after this explosion. They have on clean, pressed uniforms. They are washed and shaven. It is before breakfast and they are hungry. Each man is relieved to pass inspection. As they wait for their next orders, do they hope against hope that it will not happen again? When I ask this, I think right away of Nell's mother, when her first daughter was raped. 2 others had already been born. I try to become her, and immediately I have a feeling for the event. I find myself gripping the edge of my desk as if the ground were shaking violently. And as the violence of my imagination stops, there is a kind of numbness, a kind of confusion. Things somehow have got to go on, I say to myself. And over time, I forget. I begin to forget why I do not let my oldest daughter come home until I am home. That's just how things are done, I say to myself. Mercifully, like a nightmare whose images give me only a vague feeling of discomfort in the daytime, this violent event recedes from my consciousness. But nightmares recur. There are other daughters. Iphigenia was not the first child whom Clytemnestra saw Agamemnon murder. The great general had abducted Clytemnestra when she was already married. He had slain her husband and then torn her child from her breast and smashed it to the ground before her eyes. This is as violent an image as I can imagine, yet Clytemnestra all but erased it from her memory. She said she grew to love this man, Agamemnon, and thus when he sent for his daughter to be brought to his military camp, telling the queen that the girl was to be married to his greatest warrior, Achilles, Clytemnestra believed him. She remembered the death of her first child only when she learned that her daughter was not intended for marriage, but was instead to be immolated as a sacrifice to Artemis because Agamemnon needed wind for his sails so that he could wage his war. Pleading for her daughter's life, Clytemnestra warned Agamemnon that he would not be able to kiss any of his living children, for they would be afraid of him in the future. But this did not happen. His other children, Orestes and Electra, remained loyal to him. Orestes was only an infant when his sister was murdered by his father, and thus one can argue that it was in ignorance that he killed Clytemnestra for murdering his father. Yet he could not have been entirely ignorant. He knew, and his knowledge haunted him. He was pursued afterwards by the Furies, don't forget. No detail that enters the mind, nor the smallest instance of memory ever really leaves it. And things we had thought forgotten will arise suddenly to consciousness years later, or undetected, shape the course of our lives. And this is also true of the effect of radiation on the body. The body does not rid itself of radiation, and this exposure is cumulative. Years and years can pass between the exposure to one X-ray and another, but the effects of the first X-ray are still in the body, which can take 15 to 30 years to exhibit damage. And if radiation has damaged a chromosome, the damage may not show up until the next generation, or in cases where the inherited damage itself is genetic, the next generation after that. Paul Cooper was 21 years old when he was exposed to radiation from the explosion of a nuclear bomb in 1957. It was not until 1976 that he learned he had leukemia. He died 2 years later in 1978 at the age of 44. William Drecken was 19 when he witnessed a nuclear explosion at Bikini from the deck of the USS Ottawa in 1946. 8 years later, his wife gave birth to a son with cerebral palsy. And the next year, she gave birth to a second son with the same disease. 9 years later, the younger son had died, and 11 years after that, the death of the oldest son also. Israel Torres was half buried in a trench by the explosion of a bomb in 1957, and he began to vomit immediately. When he came out of the trench, he was still nauseous and his vision was blurred. These symptoms did not go away, but instead they worsened. He began to suffer from severe headaches, dizziness, and muscle spasms. But his illness was not taken as a warning sign of things to come in the lives of the other men who had been exposed. Instead, the doctors denied that the radiation to which he had been exposed could have caused illness. For years, the connection between coal dust and black lung disease was officially denied. And there are still doctors today who work for insurance compensation companies or the mines who deny that coal dust does damage to the human body. Israel Torres was ridiculed and even warned by one doctor that were he to continue returning for sick call, he might endanger his career in the Marines. But the Marines meant his life to him, the same way his work, his ability to do his work, meant life to Nell's father. He had to feel the illness in him, feel even the coal dust entering his lungs. I can feel what he felt, sitting there on the edge of the bed, pausing to catch his breath before he pulled on his shoes, standing to pull up his pants with a certain amount of pride that he could keep going, a pride in his manhood. Despite his illness, Israel Torres joined his brigade in a march for 100 miles with a 40-pound pack on his back. He wanted to prove his loyalty and that he was physically fit. The day after the hike, he could not walk. His whole body was numb, and he was sent into surgery. There is a joke in our family, never openly laughed at, but still a subject of ridicule, whose cruelty astonishes me now. It was about Nell, not the Nell of our story, but my great-aunt. She was never married. She was thus a spinster. And somehow the implication was that therefore she had failed as a woman. Is there a worse shame to carry than to be failed as a man or as a woman? The father of the other Nell, the Nell of this story, did not fail as a man. And the same masculinity that pushed him toward his own death in the mines somehow brought him to commit a rape against his own daughters. But this masculinity was not in his body. He had to torture his body at times to make it conform to what he called male. There are those who say that rape is part of male nature. Human error is often blamed on nature or the gods. Orestes blamed his fate on Apollo, and in the first day Euripides wrote about Iphigenia, it was only when Orestes could recognize that his own father had sinned against him that he could be freed from the torment of the Furies. I don't remember my father ever speaking in love or in hate about his father. Someone else in the family told me how they used to work together in my grandfather's business, delivering ice. Did they ever speak to each other about anything of consequence? I have no evidence for that. I think whatever feelings existed between them were as silent and as invisible as radiation. Once, years ago, when I was 11 years old, my father and I went in search of radiation. He had rented a Geiger counter, hoping to locate a uranium mine and make us rich. My father was a working man, but in an unambitious, oddly innocent way, he had dreams of clever inventions that might win him a fortune. What a strange pair we made, father and daughter, wandering aimlessly among the rocks of a California canyon, straining to hear if the strange machine my father held might make a clicking sound, and not really knowing, either of us, why we were there. My father knew little of the history of the atom bomb or of the other uses to which uranium might be put. He did not know what the effects of radiation were on the body. He did not know that Marie Curie herself had died of radiation poisoning, that the women who painted radium dials on clocks and moistened their brushes with their tongues died of cancer of the mouth, that the air around us was contaminated with fallout from atomic tests which might make either of us fatally ill in 20 years. He had a naive belief in the wonders of science, and an appreciation and a trust. And I trusted him, and trusted what he trusted, and his knowledge of it, which seemed like a kind of magic to me. The night he fixed the radio, when I was 5, I hunkered by him, watching his efforts, certain I would soon see tiny people emerge from the set, and then mystified that somehow he could make those wires produce human sounds. And I remember our trips to the Sears Roebuck down the block to buy my shoes. This was my favorite store. I always asked to go back there because they had a machine which let you see the bones in your feet through a green light. And I looked at my feet again and again, amazed and awed. In my circle of friends in the last 3 years, 5 have developed cancer. 1957. We were not thinking about radiation. This was an eventful year, the year of the Sputnik. I remember it well. I was 14 years old. The papers were full of drawings. A round object perpetually made a concentric circle around the earth. I was just entering high school, studying my 2nd year of Latin. All of Gaul is divided into 3 parts in the mind of the Roman Empire. We memorized his words. In another class on current events, we debated the emerging movements for African independence. Kenya, Nigeria, strange places on a map. This is the year in which the United States began to take space seriously. In the films of the first moon landing, the flag looks as if it is blowing proudly in a strong wind. But there is no wind on the moon. Later I learned the flag was made permanently erect with some plastic material. For some reason, this reminds me of the crinolines we wore in the decade before the moon's capture. Those starch flounces gave women's skirts at one and the same time a lip of excitement and a barrier of stiffness. This style, an invitation and an impediment to intimacy, was not an aesthetic born of girlhood so much as it belonged to the larger system by which girlhood was determined. Can it be true that a hidden aspect, the dark face of a father's abuse of his daughter or of the exploration of the moon, is an ambivalence towards closeness? After Israel Torres was given a medical discharge from the military, it became a question of vital importance to him to establish that his illness had been caused by radiation. The Marine Corps denied that this could be possible, explaining that the level of gamma radiation was too low to cause any harm. Just after the blast, a machine that was passed over Israel Torres' body began to tick wildly. He was not told the measurement the machine registered, but the man who held the machine said to him, "Marine, you have had it." And this Israel Torres did not forget. When he wrote to the military asking for the reading on the green badge he wore to record his exposure to radiation, he was told that they had lost his particular badge. In 1982, a man who had been a medic in the Army at the same test site in 1957 suddenly decided that he would tell the truth, if not about Torres, about the readings on the green badges. He had been ordered, he said, to lie about the amount of radiation registered on each badge. He had kept 2 sets of books, one with the true figures and another with a lower, false figure. But there is more to this story. Even low levels of radiation are harmful to the body. It is a common form of reasoning in this century to reassure those who are wary that the amount of radiation given off by a nuclear power plant or a nuclear waste site or a missile is less than one is exposed to during a medical X-ray. But the work of medical statisticians has revealed that X-rays cause a great deal of harm to the body. One X-ray of the whole body can lower immunity so that the age at which we are more susceptible to leukemia, easy for me to say, excuse me, susceptible to leukemia or heart disease occurs roughly 1 year earlier. In fact, the rate of leukemia and heart disease has risen consonant with the years of atomic testing. The rate of leukemia and heart disease has risen consonant with the years of atomic testing, and the average age for those conditions has lowered. And there is another part of the story still. The bomb that exploded and lit up the bones in Israel Torres' hands was designed at Livermore Laboratory. In those years, that laboratory was developing thermonuclear weapons, and they were trying to design what they had called a clean bomb because it would give off more intense radiation on the ground upon impact, but less radiation would rise in a cloud to cause fallout. It has now been established through a letter written by a lieutenant colonel to one of the men exposed to that bomb that it was a thermonuclear bomb. And there is some evidence that it was in fact a neutron bomb. In either case, the most intense and harmful rays from that bomb are neutron rays. But the badge that Torres and the other men wore measured only gamma rays. Just a few months ago, camera crews went to the neighborhood of Livermore Laboratory and took photographs of water wells, streams, and springs that had been contaminated with some kind of chemical. The laboratory denied having any responsibility for this contamination until the poison was traced to its source, and then the denial had to be retracted. In the period of time before this denial was retracted, I must have carried about a feeling of suspension in my lungs that I hardly knew about, because when I heard over the news that the laboratory had admitted culpability, I took in a deep breath. From this small moment, I can imagine how Israel Torres must have felt as again and again the military denied his illness, which finally became leukemia that had been caused by that bomb. There was a period when he wanted to give up, when he felt an apathy. Before the laboratory announces its mistake, I felt a moment of rage, and then a certain exhaustion seemed to penetrate even my heart. The task of garnering proof seemed too large. I gave up, and in my giving up, everything around me seemed to dull. You can see this look of dullness in the eyes of certain children, and it does not come simply from too little food or fatigue. Children who have been abused will turn inward, but there is something that will wake them, bring them back into a circle of humanity, and that is if the abuse to which they have been subjected is named and admitted to be true. And they long especially to have this abuse admitted by the one who abused them. Yet it is most common for a man who has raped a child to deny that the rape occurred, and to imply that the child made the story up, or if evidence is presented, to claim the child initiated the rape by seducing him. And these claims cause a second suffering as terrible as the first. But there is another phenomena among these children. A child beaten to within an inch of her life will reach out longingly for the parent who is separated from her. She will attempt to protect this parent from the scrutiny of the world, and she will mimic her father's logic by blaming herself for his abuse of her. A psychologist studied the men who were exposed to these bombs and later became ill, and found in them an obsession to establish the truth. But he also discovered that when they became enraged at the government for denying the truth, they felt guilty for their rage. What did she feel, Nell, on the first day she could not return home after school? This is not impossible to imagine. She did not tell her friends, and therefore she had a secret of which she was ashamed. Girls learn shame very early and in many different ways. Once I was in a dressing room with a group of girls who were just adolescent. They were whispering among themselves, plotting to trap one of their group while she dressed because they had guessed that this girl did not wear a bra. Girls do not display themselves but try to hide. Once when I was a girl myself, a boy my age tried to push me down and take off my underpants. He was behaving in a violent way, and his voice commanding me as he pushed me, he sounded insane. I yelled, and he ran off, and later when I told on him, the whole event was handled discreetly, except for a long time I associated the clear madness of his voice with the part of my body he wanted to see. When Nell went home that day, if she had forgotten, she then had to remember. The feeling at the dinner table was stiff and uncomfortable, and she knew that her mother knew and that her sisters knew because she was the youngest. But no one said a thing. No one said a word about it. And she felt nauseous. It was not only her father who was not the same to her. No one was the same. Not herself, not the world. It could never be the same again. Nor could the world ever be the same for Israel Torres. He never regained his normal sight. He started to go blind, but he was troubled at night with another kind of vision, by things he had seen on the day of the test. 2 of the men he commanded had disappeared. He never saw them again after that day, and yet they were not listed as dead. And he had seen something else, a vision that pressed in on him and weighed him down as much as the symptoms of his own illness. In the hospital, he told the nurse what he had seen. The next day, he was wheeled into a private room and questioned by 2 doctors and another man who was not identified. These men told him that he had been hallucinating. The next morning, a doctor attempted to hypnotize him, but the attempt failed. And the morning after that, he was flown to a hospital in San Diego, strapped in and wheeled to another private room where he was questioned by 4 men. This time the men called him a liar, and a large pill was forced down his throat. When he left that hospital, he was warned never again to tell the story about what he had seen. 2 years later, another man who had never met Israel Torres had seen a similar vision in the same desert. When he told what he had seen, he was given drugs which were supposed to make him calm. And afterwards, he was sent to a psychiatrist who, whenever he tried to tell the story of what he saw, would show the young man's films which were made up of strange juxtapositions of images, Mickey Mouse and then Hitler, Donald Duck, and then the bombing of Hiroshima. There are many things that we know, but we are not supposed to know. Sometimes there is a conspiracy to silence us, but at other times it may be that we have to tell something that no one wants to know because what we say does not fit into the scheme of things as they understand them to be. A child tells a doctor she has been raped by her father. She may even have signs on her body of this rape, a tear or a fissure, but the doctor refuses to see. A young woman remembers that she was raped, but the doctor hearing this story tells himself he only hears her fantasy. Recently, a woman who grew up in Germany during the Second World War told me this story. She and a friend went to the American base to get some papers signed, and there they saw a display of photographs of people who were in concentration camps. "This is a lie," she said out loud, not wanting to believe what she saw. So an American soldier who overheard her offered to take her to the camp so she could see for herself. She went, and afterwards suffered great trouble in her mind, for everything she had believed in had been transformed by what she saw. And I could tell that the woman who told me this story felt it was somehow wrong for the soldier to show her friend what he knew. When Israel Torres and another soldier at another time saw in the desert what Israel Torres and another soldier at another time saw in the desert could have been an image from a concentration camp, from the laboratories of Dr. Mengele, where medical experiments were carried out on human beings. Or it could have been an image from Hiroshima, somehow detached from its proper place and time, and moved forward to remind the soldiers what the meaning of their test was. Or, perhaps more frightening to us now, an image from the future traveled backward through time with the same message. Torres was in a truck traveling over the desert when one of the men in his platoon cried out and pointed. Torres turned to see a group of people, 10 or 12, in a stockade formed by a chain-link fence and barbed wire. Their faces and their hands were deformed. Their hair was falling out, and he thought that he saw that their skin was peeling off. He said that they tried to cover their faces with their hands, and that they looked more dead than alive. 2 years earlier, the second young man, whose name was Jim O'Connor, saw a group of people ushered into a bunker that was closer to the explosion than he would soon be. After the explosion, he moved closer to ground zero and tried to approach the bunker. Then he began to smell flesh burning, and finally he saw a man on the ground, in agony, blood running from his mouth and his ears and his nose, trying to tear away wires that had been attached to his head. O'Connor could not forget what he saw. For several years he tried to make his knowledge public. He wrote the Pentagon asking for an investigation. In response he received, there was this sentence: "We can neither confirm nor deny what you saw." It is a strange feeling. No doubt Nell had it too. A memory over the years takes an air of an unreality, hidden as it is in a private, unacknowledged world, and yet it persists. Even undefined, it retains a vividness, it nags and will not disappear. I can feel it in myself. Since I read the story in another history of the atomic testing, I too was haunted. It was on a bright day in late September that I drove up the coast to a town just north of Santa Barbara where Israel Torres lived. I wanted to hear the story from him directly. It was a small town I entered, one of the kind that has come into existence since the end of the last World War. Flat, stucco, small rooms, usually built as a part of a tract. I had lived in a house similar to these once myself, and my mother is still in that house. This is the first and only house Israel owned. He had paid for it in 2 years. I used to love to work for a living, he told me, but now illness has made him unable to do that. I asked him about his family, his great-grandfather. He told me he had come from Spain. One could hear traces of Spanish in his English. Torres' father had been a Marine. He had fought in Belgium in World War I. He told stories about how gas was used on those battlefields, but he was not gassed himself. After the war, he worked for the Border Patrol. Was this a natural transition, I wondered, to trade one uniform for another? After this, his father owned land and raised cattle, and eventually a couple of bars. All his sons enlisted in the Marines. Israel's brothers fought in Korea. One lost his right ear. The other lost 3 fingers when a grenade exploded in his hand. Israel enlisted when he was only 16. He lied about his age, he told me, because he wanted to follow his brothers. Israel fell immediately ill after the blast. Nausea, double vision, exhaustion, numbness, a debilitating pain in his bones and muscles. He had been married just months before. Now he suggested to his wife that she was free to leave. But she did not leave. What gave him the most pain, besides his guilt over the 2 missing men and the unnamed men he saw in the compound, was fear for the health of his children. Over the years since that time, his wife had had 5 miscarriages. Twice, he told me, he thought of taking his own life. Once was when his son was ill. The symptoms were so much like his own: hair loss, skin turning yellow, and his blood was abnormal. But his son recovered. The second time was when his grandchild began to pass blood in his stool and urine, and Israel said to himself, "That's me again." He had bled this way intermittently since the test. The effects of the experiments also continued in his mind. One dream, he tried to run from the blast while his superior officer shouted, "You're supposed to stay here. You're a leader of men." That is not the way it happened. I did stay, he told me, but the dream still troubled him. Many times he dreamed that the wind returned, the same wind that came with the blast and tore the helmet and gloves right off his body. In those dreams, the wind tried to pull him up and out of the earth. In still other returning dreams, he tried to find his missing men, and of course he would see the men in the compound again, burned, monstrous, covering their faces with their hands. "Do you know what it is," he asked me, "for a grown man to break down and cry?" I could imagine what it was for him. Not only the pain of all he had endured becoming in one moment no longer endurable, but the shattering at that same moment of a sheltering, encircling notion of who he was: a strong man, a protector, responsible to care for those more tender than he, those given to tears, but not the one who breaks down, never breaking down himself. Many nights he would wake screaming and be unable to sleep again. At 2 or 3 in the morning he would come into the living room alone and turn on the television. Once at 4 in the afternoon he found himself reliving the atomic experiment. He was seeing melted tanks, the mushroom, the medical trucks, dirt flying, the smoke, the whole thing, he told me. His sons had to hold him down on the bed until it was over. Israel had been diagnosed with leukemia. He asked me to place my hand over the lumps on his back. They were scattered all over his body, small and hard like stones. He wanted me to witness their presence on his body, and it was crucial to him that I believe his story. Almost since the day of the blast, he had been engaged in this terrible struggle to be believed. He told me he was afraid to go to the Veterans Hospital. They wanted to remove cancer from his prostate gland, but he did not trust them, he said, while he was under anesthesia. There had been that trip to the hospital at Camp Pendleton, the curious holes in his memory, and the dreamlike quality of what he did remember. White pills shoved down his throat in the middle of the night, waking at Balboa Hospital 600 miles away with no memory of traveling, and the weird, fat, red-faced little captain who held up a coin, swaying it before his eyes, and had been so angry because he would not cooperate. And there was more. The doctor from the Veterans Hospital Administration who told him his radiation count had been low but would not put this in writing. And the other VA doctor who told him that if he wanted his own medical records, he would have to hire an attorney. When he returned with a lawyer, this doctor claimed Israel had never been treated by him or anyone at the hospital. There was the private doctor in Lompoc who had spent hours with him and began to write letters to the Veterans Administration on Israel's behalf, trying to get his radiation count and his record of treatment. One day, when Israel showed up for his regular appointment with his doctor, he found the man had disappeared with no prior notice and leaving no forwarding address. Had the Veterans Administration approached him? Had someone threatened him? It was like a nightmare with no resolution, or one of those eerie films made in the decade after the war's end in which crimes are committed with no clear reason by no clear perpetrator. And then there was the newspaper article. At the time of the tests, Israel was not allowed to tell his young wife where he was or why, but she read the newspapers, and she saw a picture of him in a local paper with a caption that connected him to the tests. Years later, when Israel began to make inquiries about his own case and his missing men and the men in the compound, the VA claimed they had no record of his participation in those tests, and that, as far as they were concerned, officially, he had not been there. It was then that his wife remembered the newspaper. He wrote a friend in the area where it had been published who went for him into the newspaper's morgue, where they keep the back issues. Israel's wife was right. The friend sent 3 copies. Immediately, Israel sent one to the VA. What ensued was a travesty of bureaucratic correspondence, worthy of the travails of Joseph K. in Kafka's The Trial. Would he send another copy? Would he send the original? He sent another copy, but he could not send the original since he did not have it. Could he send the name of the newspaper and the date of the publication, and still another copy? Yes, he said. Could he tell them the name and date, and he did, and did he send another copy? He cannot remember now, because when they asked in another letter for still another copy, he could not find it. So he wrote his friend again. Would he make more copies from the original? Yes, his friend said he would. And then the next day he received a call. His friend had tried to do this for him, but the original was no longer there. It had vanished. One must have the experience of illness over a long period of time to grasp the significance of these words, in a manner befitting a human being. One's body, shivering, exhausted, or feverish wet, becomes alien to one's own existence, and even to all existence. If at one time there was a self who felt as if human, that self has been shaken loose, and as the shaking continues, is ebbing away, disappearing as certainly as a vanished document spirited by some strange and nightmarish wind. One does not remember what it is to be well, but something more than absent remains. The finger lost in an accident feels pain, nerves as if extended into a ghostly appendage. Events forgotten reappear in dreams, and fragments of memory left in the mind cry out as if for the connecting knowledge. Unless, of course, another false order of events has been created from the fragments so that even the scent of memory is threatening. What then did they feel, those who had answered Israel's letters? Did the answer come from one person or from many? Were the letters composed according to the dictates of a policy as mysterious and unaccountable to the authors of the letters as to Israel himself? What passed through the mind of the VA doctor that day that Israel returned to confront him and began to shout so that in order to continue with his schedule, he had to have the man who had been his patient ushered out of the hospital by military police? It was in another winter, 2 years before I met Israel, that I was approached by a woman who wanted to tell me how she had reluctantly participated in a series of falsehoods. I'm going to stop there.
It would be inappropriate to clap.
I've been reading from A Chorus of Stones, which I think could accurately be called A Meditation on War. It's by Susan Griffin. There it is.
And I'm really glad that you read that. And tomorrow at 11, there's going to be a demonstration about the nuclear testing that they're doing now again. They've started doing the testing again.
Oh, right.
And here we're going to have people talking more about this tomorrow. I just wanted to give you a hug.
My pleasure.
Oh, well, Mr. Dick Manning, who has written a wonderful book called A Good House, was going to come and read to us from it about building a house for himself to live in. However, he is on the road reading this now and couldn't be here. And so he apologizes for not being here, and he's here with us in spirit. And Tracy Stone Manning has a couple things to say and read and whatever else. I'm going to play with lights just a little bit.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
After the last 3 readings, healthy sex and healthy relationships seem almost like oxymorons.
Wait a minute, wait. Let me get you some lights that don't fuzz. So.
Seem almost like oxymorons, as I was just saying. So I think my role this evening, if I'm right, Temi, is to be somewhat of the optimist.
Yeah, or the future, or that as Craig says, here all comes someday. These poor camera people are so endlessly patient. So optimist.
Future.
Or courage in the face of the truth of horror. Then what? Right? Is that right? I mean, if
heavy.
Well,
or responsible.
I mean, is it possible to build anything, any future, or anything of value in relationships or houses or anything in a world that has this kind of horror in it?
Right.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. I had not planned on reading this one very small piece from The Sun, but this morning I really needed to talk to my mother. And this is about her, so I thought I'd read it. My parents liked sex. They never said anything about it, but there were the signs. A locked bedroom door on a weekend afternoon, a raunchy birthday card, a lingering kiss. But when I began dating, I couldn't ask Mom about sex. She said, "You're an adult now, and some things are better left unsaid." My first Christmas as a married woman, Mom sent satin lingerie, emerald green boxers, and a matching camisole. "Now that you're an honest woman," her note began. "Do I know this, Mother?" I said to my husband. Weeks later, I deciphered her gesture. My marriage freed her from her Catholic guilt. No longer an accomplice to mortal sin, she could encourage my passion. On my birthday, she sent a teddy. While I modeled it for my husband, I pondered how odd the gift seemed. I needed time to adapt to this new relationship with Mom. She called one day. "Oh, Tracy, I want to go shopping and have lunch with you." She was 2,000 miles away. "Come to Missoula," I said. "You can't shop and have lunch in Missoula," she said. When I got off the plane, she hugged me. "We have lots to catch up on," she said. "We're both going through a first year of marriage." Dad had been retired for a year. They were still adjusting to their new roles as constant companions. Mom needed a confidant. We cruised into a Victoria's Secret. She said, "This time, we're buying something for me." I laughed. I played her personal shopper, delivering items to her dressing room. Ha! You can wear that. I can't, she said. Then, does it hide enough? Reveal enough? She considered the more subdued peach, but I talked her into a brilliant green and purple nightshirt, silk and teasingly sheer. That was for Mom. This essay is called Crossings. From my perch, I watched Dick cast. I sat on a limestone boulder, part of the small basin that holds Upper Holland Lake. The quiet September afternoon wrapped around us, cradling us. Dick's fishing line cracked the stillness a moment, whipping through the air in mid-cast. But despite the silence, I could not quiet internal noise. Dick and I were backpacking across the Bob Marshall Wilderness, which straddles the Continental Divide in western Montana. We were honeymooning. I had been a married woman for 24 hours. Unsettling questions nagged at me. What if my gang of friends, the marriage cynics, are right? What if I have stifled my independence? I heard their voices. You married? Come on. No way. I stared, terrified, at my relaxed fishing husband. I was faced with being both an individual and half a partnership. Was I ready to give that? For the past 2 years, I had been living the recreational life of a graduate student. 14 and a half years older than me, Dick's student days were long over. What would happen to mine? My stomach turned and a cold sweat glued my t-shirt to my skin. I picked up my journal, hoping to write off the hysteria. I wrote about our wedding day, about how a pileated woodpecker had escorted Dick and I on a hike to the falls between Upper Holland and Holland Lake. Its loud call seemed to trumpet our mission. At the falls, we exchanged our private wedding vows beneath the roaring hush of rushing water. It's legal to marry yourself in Montana. Later that afternoon, we held the public ceremony on a lawn beside Holland Lake with family and good friends. My brother, Rick, spoke of love as mystery. Dick's face cracked, verging on tears, and my tears fell freely when Rick said, "Marriage, like all other worthy pursuits, requires a surrendering unto the mystery. By surrendering unto the mystery, we find each other and ourselves. In surrendering, we attain freedom. In surrendering, we learn understanding, and in surrendering, we know love." We were surrendering. Even on our wedding day, we could not explain this thing we called love. It just is. Was as close as we could come. But 5 miles into our honeymoon, sitting on the boulder, that explanation suddenly did not suffice. I craved reason and vowed to override this panic. I tried. I stretched out the hike's knots. I continued to watch Dick fish. I began to relish the 2 weeks ahead. When Dick and I planned the honeymoon, we agreed we should stay in Montana. We wanted to begin our married life in our home on a journey together, alone. We hoped to take our time and partake in something thoughtful. Wilderness seemed the natural choice. We hiked in on the west side of the Bob, would walk east until we crossed the divide, and then would spend a week walking out. We would cover about 75 miles and 2 weeks at a fairly relaxed pace. I found some yarrow in bloom the second day, beneath the wilderness boundary sign. Yarrow had gone to seed in the valley, so this was a treat. It's my favorite flower. I carried it in my wedding bouquet. Achilles supposedly treated his troops with it, hence yarrow's Latin name, Achillea. It has curbed a cold for me a couple of times, but beyond that, it's simply a beautiful flower, a composite, with small white flowers composing the flower head and a wispy, fern-like leaves gracing the stem. As I pointed out the yarrow below me to Dick, 2 pack strings of mules walked by us. These outfitters were packing in the necessary goods they'd need to give their clients, dudes, all the comforts of home. When hunting season opened in the Bob the following week, the packers would escort the dudes to their established camps. I wondered if the outfitters noticed the yarrow, or if they ever took the time to point it out to their dudes. After the pack string passed and the dust settled, we walked down through old-growth spruce. Green and brown and wet enveloped us. Moss hung from the immense trees. Light spiraled through to the forest floor. The cool air dried the sweat on my forehead, and soon the trail opened up to a series of avalanche chutes. remnants of the big trees laid on the ground, making room for huckleberry bushes that now coated the land. Bears eat huckleberries, and I had lived in Montana for 2 years, making me a newcomer to camping in grizzly country. The notion of seeing a grizzly in the backcountry exhilarated and terrified me at the same time. I walked faster. We reached Big Salmon Lake on the 3rd day. The lake runs 4 miles long and about a half a mile wide. Engelmann spruce, larch, and Douglas fir cover the surrounding hillsides. The larch hinted at autumn. Their usually deep green needles had turned Kelly, about a week away from golden. We were alone. We had stumbled upon a pocket of calm. If this lake stood near a road, condos and jet boats would intrude. And I did not mind that tonight it'd take me a while to fall asleep on the hard ground. We made our temporary home at the mouth of Big Salmon Creek, where it emptied into the lake. We would cook under some Engelmann spruce by the creek, sleep under the stars in a small clearing near the point, and drink coffee on the sandy beach at the point, a honeymoon suite. We decided to lay over a day, knowing we could not rush past this place. In the evening, the hillsides shone pink. The next day, Dick spent the afternoon with fly rod in hand, catching trout that averaged 18 inches long. Even after his fly rod snapped in half and he spliced it together with a twig and duct tape, he kept grinning. He said I'd never hit a spot like this again, that I ought to learn how to fly fish there. We stood in the lake's edge and cast. I intently watched a cutthroat trout considering my fly. It took it and I set the hook. Overhead, a hawk flew. "Trace, what's that?" "I can't look, I'm too busy with this fish." But I could not resist. Often I gauged places by birds. I gave the line a bit of slack and looked up. A northern harrier. A second later, Dick said, "Now, look up the creek." 2 mule deer stepped into the creek 20 yards upstream. Still coaxing in the cutthroat, I wondered what drew us to this enchanted place. After our trout dinner, as the last pink dissolved from the sky, we heard a loon calling on the lake. I'd seen loons before, but never heard one call. Its high pitch settled into my shoulders, dissolving some of the backpack kinks. I fantasized that we would stay in this place forever, watching and listening. We woke up to the loon calling again, handing me incentive to crawl out of our sleeping bag into the crisp morning air. As Dick brewed coffee, I watched the now silent loons wander through heavy mist. These birds of ancient lineage spoke to me. They mate for life. Soon a family of beaver swam in front of me, leaving a V-shaped wake. They gathered some reeds and carried the stash back to their dam, working to stave off the coming winter. A great blue heron stood statue-like among the reeds. There were no blacks and whites that morning, not even on the loons. The angled light cutting through the fog had softened everything to gray. The noise and partying of the wedding week drifted miles and weeks away. I drank in the calm and felt silly about the panicked, doubtful episode on the rocks a few days earlier. Of course I wanted to live with a man who appreciates this, needs this as much as I do, I told myself. Still, the nagging, rational part of me wanted specific assurances and answers that marriage was a good idea. I didn't question my love for Dick, I questioned marriage. I had seen women give up aspirations of travel, consuming careers, the fire in their soul, it seemed, all for marriage. The ease of slipping into submission frightened me. Blinded, I saw only what there was to lose. Was love worth surrendering control? We spent the rest of the day on the beach, relaxing and soaking up each other's company. I didn't want to return to civilization. The next morning's frosted air hastened our task of packing. Try that again. The next morning's frosted air hastened our task of packing. That's a hint to rewrite that sentence. The faster I packed, the warmer I kept to myself. As we gathered our gear, we heard the rumble of a helicopter in the distance. It thundered closer until finally it leapt from behind the ridge, holding the creek. "What the hell are they doing?" I yelled over the noise. "They're probably outfitters looking for elk," Dick said. "But aren't helicopters illegal in a wilderness area?" "I don't know. Even so, who's watching? Maybe it's the Forest Service doing some kind of census work," Dick said. Dudes spend thousands of dollars to hunt in the wilds of Montana. So outfitters sometimes locate grazing elk herds a couple of days before the dudes arrive. This reconnaissance helps guarantee a successful hunt. After the helicopter episode, we left. Dick was quiet. His normally soft, bearded face had tightened a bit, creasing his forehead. He gets angry and disappointed when people violate their connection to a place. And until I met him, I thought no one would understand that same quirk in me. I led the way that morning, walking back into the quiet, shedding the noise of the helicopter. We headed for the South Fork of the Flathead River, 4 miles ahead at the end of the lake. There we would encounter a stream crossing. As a child, I always hated crossing the creek in the park near my suburban home. Somehow I always managed to fall in, delighting my childhood friends. And as an adult, I challenged myself to get over this fear of slippery rocks, loose logs, and humiliation. I did not have a chance at this crossing. A wide bridge spanned the way. This bit of artifice in the supposed wilderness offended me, even though I knew it protected the creek from plodding pack animals carrying upwards of 400 pounds. The bridge ensures the wildness of the creek, threatened by the weight of conveniences, steaks, wood stoves, beer, that pack animals carry for outfitters. A quarter mile up the trail, we found a Forest Service compound. A small cabin stood in the woods next to a large fenced pasture. The sign on the gate warned, "Administrative grazing only. No public grazing allowed." This was wilderness? I couldn't understand what possessed the Forest Service to dole out enough outfitting permits to render themselves campground hosts, range managers, and bridge builders. Like many other times, I found myself resenting them. But I couldn't wholly resent the outfitters. They bring people into the Bab who would normally never venture in on their own. More of us need to feel the wilderness, have it creep into our bones. Yet as I spent days walking through horse-made mud troughs that were supposed to be trails, I wondered what dudes miss by not having their feet on the ground. I liked having slightly sore leg and back muscles. I liked recognizing the art and utility of my boots. Hiking can be a difficult mode of travel, but a simple one that forces us to consider place. We walked past the Forest Service camp and came upon a lodgepole pine pocket. The lodgepoles grew straight and thick, offering no sunlight to the barren forest floor. I saw nothing but lodgepoles and their needles piled thick on the ground. I heard no overt signs of wildlife, and my mind tuned to the methodic pace of walking. I thought about my mother. I am my parents' only daughter. They had 4 sons, then me. My mother has always encouraged my independence. She suggested I work as a teenager for some financial independence, which I did. She suggested I spend a year abroad in college, which I did. She encouraged me to find a successful career, which at this writing she would still encourage. She did not really understand why I moved to Montana from Washington, D.C., so my father and she came to visit my first summer here. On that visit, they came to understand why I call Montana my home. They saw how relaxed I was, and they knew it was not likely that I would return east. Their discovery excited me. So when I got the, "Tracy, when are you going to meet a nice doctor or lawyer?" speech, I was disappointed. Since I'd passed on a public relations career in Washington, they thought I wouldn't find security in my life anywhere. They banked on someone else to provide it for me. I found that notion absurd and claustrophobic. The kind of marriage they promoted reeked of the pre-bra burning days. It would provide security at all costs, including a wife who would give up her charter. It was the sort of marriage, I figured, that my skeptical friends called normal. I always assumed mine would be different. When I introduced my folks to Dick as my fiancé a year and a half later, they were pleased. This worried me. I had always battled their notions on marriage. They said I glowed. Some things still puzzled them, though. My mother thought we were crazy to backpack in the wilds for our honeymoon. "For God's sakes, call me when you get out," she said. "Otherwise I'll be sure you've been eaten by a bear. I can't understand why you put yourselves at risk like that." I thought about that word, risk. I couldn't explain to her that I thought 2 weeks alone in the backcountry with my husband was just the kind of risk I needed. We broke out of the lodgepole forest, and my thoughts returned to our surroundings. We walked down to the floodplain of the South Fork of the Flathead, through old guard ponderosa pine meadows, washed in golds, reds, and browns. They were red bark giants, only about 8 to an acre, each affirming their age by their stature. We traveled together in silence. Often Dick and I do not need to talk. When we do, we find that one of us has filched the other's thoughts, word for word. Without speech, we wandered over to the braided river where we camped on a sandy beach for the night. The next morning, we fixed a breakfast of oatmeal and golden raisins to warm up. The water left in the kettle from the night before had frozen. I stood in the gold morning warmth, happy for the simplicity of sun and oatmeal. Dick watched me, understanding my mood, smiling. We moved on after eating, eager to get to the divide. We crossed the South Fork, and even the rapid current posed no problems for me. In fact, the cold water refreshed my feet. That afternoon, we camped creekside and took the opportunity to bathe. At home, I take showers for granted. 6 days into a trip, bathing promised to be a sheer joy. It was, albeit a brief and almighty cold one. The water stunned, the kind of water that makes your feet prickle when you stand in it too long. I adored it. It chilled my sweaty, dirty body. Afterwards, I found a rock to lie on, like a snake seeking warmth. I thought of my friend Beck. We were best friends in high school, and although our lives differ completely now, there remains a tie we do not question. She traveled from New York for my wedding, leaving her husband and 2 kids behind for the first time. When she was visiting, I wondered if marriage skeptics would vilify her marriage. She is a devout Mormon who stays at home with her kids. She wishes to pursue an opera career and is talented enough, but cannot find the time. The night before my wedding, Beck, some other friends, and I alternated between skinny dipping in the lake and baking in the sauna. Beck couldn't get enough of it, saying, "Oh, if my husband could only see me now." "What would he say?" I teased. "I don't care because I feel so free and clean," she said. Her word choice intrigued me. I had not known what she meant until Dick and I bathed in the creek. Afterwards, as I basked in the sun, I felt life. The sun quashed the chill in my bones, and I paid close attention to the process. I felt a certain freedom, taking such pleasure in something as simple as bathing. But I found I rejoiced because I was with my husband, not free of him. The next morning, we set out to climb over the divide, up 5 miles and 2,600 feet. This was the midpoint of our trip. We were about to leave the tree-dense, closed-in west side of the divide to spend a week wandering across the open, rocky floodplains of the east side. As we started the ascent, we walked by an outfitter's camp that looked more a village than camp. The Wilderness Act does not allow for permanent structures in designated wilderness areas. Here we found a wooden corral, a 40-foot wall tent, a kitchen wall tent with smoke rising from a stovepipe, separate sleeping quarters, hundreds of hay bales, and an electric fence surrounding it all. A tape deck blasted from one of the tents. I walked up to the fence but could not go past. I was walled off by from what public right was my land too. I tried to imagine how the visitors in this camp got a feel for wilderness, a place with no controls. I had found that wilderness teaches to let walls of security and fear down. But their literal walls, the electric fence and the house-sized tents, barred all chances of that happening. This missed opportunity saddened me. Wilderness clients pay hundreds of dollars a day for security, vain attempts to control their surrounding in a place that thrives on chaos. I found myself wanting these people, nice folks, I'm sure, to take risks. I wanted them to feel the sense of freedom and security risks can provide. Granted, I thought to myself, you too have brought bits of civilization with you. I carried a sleeping bag, a nylon tarp, and clothes that were all engineered to ward off the elements. My boots cost more than I can afford, designed so that I would bless them daily. Yet I felt that my mode of travel carried less baggage than the dudes. I walked on, saddened by evidence that wilderness doesn't automatically teach us to let down walls. I realized that was something you have to want to learn. Only then can wilderness teach that real security, real freedom, comes through risk. The second mile beyond the outfitter's village, I began to forget about learning from wilderness. I was too busy sweating. This stretch, as Dick said, was a bitch. Each step, I felt gravity and the load of my pack tugging at my thighs. I could feel my breaths feeding my pumping blood. I was stretching myself. Perversely, I liked it. We climbed continually, as if destined to climb for the rest of our journey. We hiked above tree line. The only trees growing here were Krumholtz, gnarled and made small by the unforgiving altitude. These white-barked pine looked as though a bonsai gardener had tended them. I felt too tall for this place. At the top of the divide, the muscles in my legs quivered like the needle of a sewing machine. Still, I rejoiced, hugging Dick. But as we dipped over the other side of the divide, I became anxious. I felt watched. For miles, I could see the red leaves of huckleberry bushes, thick carpets among the occasional dwarfed white-bark pine. On closer look at a bush, I understood why I felt watched. Its branches dragged to the ground. They were laden with ripe, juicy huckleberries. The wind ripped so hard that I had to shout to Dick, "Is this bear country or what?" "He knows," he said, pointing to a large pile of blue bear shit in front of him. The pass promised a view of the southern tip of the Chinese Wall, a bare ridge 13 miles long. We headed off the trail toward an overlook only about 200 yards away. I walked slowly, expecting to bump into a bear behind every bush-sized pine. At our lunch spot, Dick unpacked a tin of sardines he had saved for a week, his halfway point meal. Dick," I said, "do you have to eat those oily, smelly things here now?" "You're damned right," he said. "I will not let some bear take away what I've been looking forward to for a week." "You are a crazy man." We gazed at the back of the wall, but I was too nervous to appreciate it. Dick's sardines reeked more than usual as the wind carried their smell past my nose. I gulped trail mix and wanted to leave. We finished eating and returned to the trail and started walking down through the long, three-sided bowl. It was open country, still above tree line. Steep hills full of huckleberries surrounded us. I felt terribly exposed. The wind blew hard, and it seemed that we'd fallen into a vacuum of space. 5 minutes down the trail, Dick spotted a bear about 300 yards above us on the right hillside. I glassed it with binoculars and confirmed that this massive animal nosing through the bushes was a grizzly. I felt somewhat relieved. It was far away, considering the wind was in our favor, and a small gully separated us. And with relief came a thrill. It's not often that backcountry hikers get to see these powerful beasts. This grizzly seemed a good omen for our marriage. We continued down the trail after a minute or so of gawking, chattering about the fortune of a faraway bear encounter. Dick had traveled in the bob on many occasions without ever spotting a grizz. I could tell he was particularly excited. He's usually a quiet hiker. "Another one," he said. This grizz also foraged on the right hillside above us, only closer, about 200 yards away. Its large body wore a black coat with grizzled silver tips and a hump at the shoulders. "Uh-oh," said Dick, watching the bear through binoculars. It just picked up our scent. It looked right at us. But we faced no real danger because the gully separating us from the other bear had become a pretty deep gorge here. This grizz would have to fly to get to us. We chose not to tempt it and walked on. Now I gasped excitedly. We were safe, I thought. The valley floor forest was a half a mile away. The trail had moved up to the left hillside, taking us farther from the bears on the right hillside. I couldn't believe we had seen 2 bears, and I was babbling. My chatter must have alerted the bear behind the big rock we were walking around. She stood on her hind legs, curiously waiting for us. We jolted to a stop. This bear watched us from 50 feet away, just down the trail. "What do you think we should do?" I asked. "Back up slowly." We did, but quickly found that the rock we had just walked around again blocked our sight of the bear. "We should make noise to have her move away from us," I said. Dick and I began to blabber on how we wanted no part, no sir, none of the huckleberries in this bowl. "I'm going to see if she's gone," said Dick after a couple minutes. "I'm going too. We look bigger and tougher as a unit of 2, I said. We walked slowly around the rock, only to find the bear had not budged. She remained on her hind legs, nose thrust forward like a retriever, trying to get a handle on these 2 things in front of her. "Well, now what? We can't go back up the trail," I said. "Who knows how many more are up there?" "If we cut off the trail and walk down the hill, we'll give her space for us to get by below her. And after we've passed her, we'll cut back up to the trail," Dick said. "Okay," I thought. "We can do this." Once off the trail, I kept stumbling. We had to walk through huckleberry bushes that grabbed at our boots, broken shale, and clumps of bear grass. Unstable ground surfaces scare me as much as log crossings. This was no time to pick my way timidly down the hill. Still, I had visions of twisting an ankle, falling, and becoming bear food. Adrenaline pumped. Rocks slipped out from underneath my feet. Bear grass stalks snapped off in my hand as I desperately grabbed them for balance. I kept telling myself that neither of us would get hurt, that headlines of a honeymoon couple finding disaster in the wilds would prove too corny. I couldn't look at the bear, partly because I wanted to watch the ground, and partly because I knew eye contact threatens bears, but mostly because I was afraid she'd be closer. Dick, what's she doing? It's okay, she's gone back to eating. I ventured to look. She was still on her hind legs, looking at us. Christ, Dick, I thought, this is no time for chivalry. She is not. We'll be okay, just keep coming, as fast as you can. She's farther now. I'm still not sure if Dick was trying to reassure himself or me. By the time we moved far enough away and climbed back up to the trail, the bear had meandered on. We didn't meander, we hauled. We left the minefield of huckleberries and bears farther and farther behind us until finally we reached valley floor, level ground. Here the huckleberries stood naked under lodgepole pines. A year later, I recall the bear encounter and remember the outfitter's fear of the wild and my fear of marriage. Walls of security, whether they be an electric fence or stubborn independence, can wrap around you and cut you off, giving fear its head. I had no shield for that bear. I was an easy meal. The bear and the fear humbled me, allowing me to feel a sense of place. The day before the journey, when I stood up in front of my family and friends proclaiming my commitment to Dick, I had no certain reasoning to stand on. I still don't. I believe unknowable forces guided me onto this unstable but hallowed ground. My skeptical friends were right in part. I am less independent. I depend on my husband to be my touchstone, my grounding wire. But I am stronger now, too, in order to ground him. So some independence is gone, but I've gained more now, more than I've lost. I cry more easily, now that he is there to hold my quaking body. I laugh more, knowing Dick understands the smile in my eyes.
Wait a second, Trace.
It's the last sentence.
I know, wait, we're gonna get beautiful light for it. Oh, I know why it's here. You know what? Plugged in. All right, there we go. Well, they wouldn't be able to hear it because it would be buzzing. Okay, go back one more sentence.
But I am stronger now too,
Thank you.
in order to ground him. So some independence is gone, but I've gained more than I've lost. I cry more easily, now that he's there to hold my quaking body. I laugh more, knowing Dick understands the smile in my eyes. But my cry of independence took guarding. With the shield down, I'm exposed, and I live more fully. And that is all.
Oh, I know what it is. You know, remember when that plug came unplugged? It plugged back in the wrong place. I think that's why we were-
I met these couple that were honeymooning in Marshall.
Yeah.
Cruise vessel.
Okay, I need a camera,
They both saw it.
Okay, okay, wait a minute. I have to say first. Thank you to Craig Montier, and thank you to Tracy Stone Manning, and thank you to me, Temi Rose, and thank you to Michael White, and thank you to Richie Doyle, and thank you for Bruce Fryer, and thank you to Terry Jimerson in the control room, and Cindy Taylor, and Lori Hudak. And next is Michael Marsalik and a whole lot of people who are about to come in and set up. Okay.